January 26, 1945. The frozen woods outside the French town of Holtzwihr, a landscape of white and grey, of shattered trees and deep, unnatural silence. Lieutenant Audie Murphy stood on the turret of a burning tank destroyer. Smoke, thick and black, curled around him, stinging his eyes. The metal beneath his feet was hot. To his left, his crew, wounded, bleeding, were dragging themselves to the relative safety of a nearby forest line. Behind him, in the dense, dark wood, he could hear the movements of his company, what was left of it, pulling back under a storm of German mortar and machine gun fire. But in front of him, the field was alive. It crawled with grey-green uniforms. German infantry, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, advancing behind the cover of 2 Panzer tanks. Their shapes moved like ghosts through the haze of snow and cordite. The air itself vibrated with the thump, thump, thump of tank guns and the relentless, ripping sound of automatic fire. The American line was breaking. The order to retreat was already in effect. Murphy watched his last man, his radio operator, limp into the trees. He was alone now. 20 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall. He weighed maybe 120 pounds. In his hands was the phone connected to the tank destroyer's internal radio. At his feet, mounted on the burning vehicle's scorching hull, was a heavy .50 caliber machine gun. The heat from the flames below began to lick at his boots. The smoke clawed at his lungs. The German line kept coming, a slow, confident tide. They had seen the Americans fall back. They had seen the vehicle catch fire. They saw a single small figure standing atop it, silhouetted against the black smoke. For Audie Murphy, time did not slow down. It crystallized. In that shard of frozen time, there was no heroism. There was only a simple, brutal arithmetic. He had the radio. He could call in artillery on his own position. It was the textbook solution. A final, desperate act to blunt the enemy advance. It would mean his own death, almost certainly. But it might buy his company the minutes they needed to regroup, to form a new line deeper in the woods. It was a fair trade. 1 life for 100. This was the calculus of command he had been taught. He looked at the machine gun. Then he looked at the field, at the advancing infantry, now less than a football field away. He could see individual faces. He could hear their shouts, coordinating the advance. The tanks were turning their turrets, seeking new targets. Him. The other option was not an option. It was insanity. To stay on this burning metal coffin, to man the .50 caliber alone, exposed from the waist up, and try to hold back an entire company supported by armour. It was not a defensive action. It was a suicide pact with a machine gun. It would achieve nothing but a faster, more theatrical death. No artillery officer would fire on a position where a friendly soldier was still fighting. By choosing the gun, he was choosing to die for nothing, and possibly costing his men their chance as the German advance continued unchecked. But the textbook did not account for the feeling in his gut, a cold, solid knot of refusal. It did not account for the faces of the men who had just dragged themselves into those woods, trusting him to cover them. It did not account for the simple, terrifying thought, I am not done yet. The choice was not between life and death. Both paths ended in the same place, here, on this frozen field. The choice was between how his death would matter. A statistic in an artillery report, a brave notation in a logbook, or a furious, defiant, and utterly futile noise. He dropped the radio handset. It clattered against the hot steel. He turned his back on the retreat, on the safe cover of the trees, on the sane choice. His hands, numb with cold, gripped the handles of the .50 caliber. The metal was searing. He ignored it. He took a breath of burning air and opened fire. The sound was immense, a deafening roar that pushed back against the noise of the battlefield. Tracer rounds cut crimson lines through the grey afternoon, stitching across the snow towards the advancing infantry. The effect was immediate and shocking. The German line, so confident a moment before, wavered. Men dove for cover. The advance faltered. They were not prepared for this, not for this torrent of fire from a single burning wreck, not for the madness of it. Murphy swept the gun back and forth. He aimed for the infantry around the tanks, trying to separate them from their armour. One of the Panzers turned its main gun towards him. He saw the long barrel swinging, a black eye seeking him out. He kept firing. A shell screamed past the vehicle, exploding in the trees behind. The concussive blast washed over him. He kept firing. He was shouting now, not words, just a raw, continuous sound lost in the gun's roar, calling in coordinates to an artillery spotter that did not exist. A performance of command for an enemy who could not hear him. He swung the gun towards the German officers he could see, trying to rally their men. He fired at the machine gun nests being set up on the flank. Every second he held their attention here was a second his company was not being pursued. The world shrunk to the view down the gun's sights, to the kick of the massive weapon against his shoulder, to the burning heat rising through the soles of his boots. He was no longer a lieutenant making a choice. He was a function of the machine, a spark of will, keeping a torrent of lead flowing into the enemy. He did not know how long it lasted. Long enough for the German attack to lose its momentum, to stall, and then begin to pull back, confused and bloodied by this inexplicable single-point resistance. Long enough for his company to solidify a new defensive position in the woods. Only when the field was clearing, when the immediate roar had faded to the moans of the wounded and the crackle of the fire consuming his vehicle, did he stop. His hands were blistered, his uniform was smouldering. The silence that rushed in was almost more terrifying than the noise. He climbed down. He did not feel like a legend. He felt empty, scorched clean from the inside. He walked off the field, through the snow, towards the trees, where his men stared at him as if he were a ghost. The Medal of Honor citation would call it indomitable courage and conspicuous gallantry. It would cite the 250 enemy troops, the 2 tanks, the machine he turned against them. It would make him famous. But the consequence of his choice was not the medal. It was the silence that settled in him afterward. A quiet space where the roar of the .50 caliber would echo for the rest of his life. It was the looks from new soldiers who saw a hero, while he saw only a man who had once made a very simple, very insane calculation on a burning hull. He had chosen the futile gesture over the statistically sound sacrifice. He had chosen to fight, not to die. And in doing so, he had rewritten the arithmetic of that field. He carried the weight of that choice, not as pride, but as a profound and private fatigue. A knowledge that at the critical moment he had listened not to the manual, but to the stubborn, quiet voice that said, "Not yet." Years later, haunted by memories, unable to sleep without a loaded pistol under his pillow, he would tell an interviewer, "I never liked being called the most decorated soldier. There were many who did more. They just didn't come back." The stand at Holtzwihr was not about killing 250 men. It was about one man, in a single crystallized second, choosing the nature of his own end. He chose not to be a target for artillery, but a source of fire. He chose the impossible. And in the economy of war, where logic reigns, his was a transaction of pure, defiant illogic.
He bought time with rage and paid for it with every quiet moment for the rest of his life. The battlefield fell silent. The war within him was just beginning.